All right, medieval combat video review. This one submitted by someone who was observing these fights, and we're analyzing it with permission of Sir Oz on the left. On the right, we have Sir Wulfgar, and yeah, these fighters, I'm told, know each other quite well, though I've never met either of them, and it's a pretty good set of practice matches within the context of the SCA. So let's take a quick look at what we can see, and we'll break down these fights. We'll go one pass at a time. We'll analyze each fighter's style and see if we can glean any insights. So here obviously I'm running in slow motion, but there's a few things we can tell right off the bat. First of all, and most obviously, Wulfgar's got a much wider shield, a little bit taller as well, but particularly wide for an arm-strapped heater. Oz is fighting with a very small buckler, basically, an arm-strap buckler in the shape of a heater. Both right-handed. Oz is a little bit taller, it looks like. And other than that, what we start to look at are things like stance. So you can't tell a lot with armor on about someone's athleticism or anything like that. These guys probably know each other fairly well, as we said. But let's start looking at stance. First off, Wulfgar's shield is relatively tipped forward right now. So this bottom corner of the shield is kicked fairly far forward. That gives a couple advantages. One is that it creates this really steep angle at the top of the shield, which is a little hard to shoot over. One of the disadvantages is that the leg starts to come open, especially, not particularly at this range, but if Oz is to shoot in, he can start throwing shots around this side as a right-hander, aiming for that leg or the back. With a particularly wide shield like that, it's probably not that much of a vulnerability to Wulfgar, but let's see how these fights play out. The other thing is he's got his sword forward, protecting his head a little bit. When we look at Oz's stance, with such a small shield, he doesn't have a lot of a stance necessarily. So people fighting with small shields have to be quite fluid and move around a lot. So obviously he's got some defense up front. Sort of his hands can offer some protection. He's in a bit of a boxer stance. This sword is in a relatively neutral position. It being forward offers some defense. There's obviously, a pretty big opening here. And then, you've got openings all over here. So, he's got to be really active with his defense. Although I think, if you're too active with that shield or sword defense, you're going to end up getting faked out of position, which is, one of the trade-offs. Speaking of trade-offs, the benefit of having a small shield is that you can be more active. Your opponent can't use it for their own defense. And then finally, you're able to throw some shots that your shield would get in the way of. So let's watch a couple opening exchanges. And here we can see, so Wulfgar stepped in and managed to take that arm by sort of freezing Oz's defense a little bit. So as Wulfgar's closing, you can see he feints an offside shot. It looks like he's going to throw over here. It doesn't. Commits pretty hard in and now is defending himself. This is a hanging block, but it's also a wind-up for any sort of moulinet. And you can see at this point, Oz is now dropping the tip of his sword down for defense while leaving his shield in position. He can't really afford to get that shield faked out of position too much. So here, what Oz is reading, he's got the sword on the far side of his body, he's got the shield on the far side of his body. He's reading a shot that's going to come around like this. That's going into the background as an onside shot to Oz's left side of the body. But instead, Wulfgar turns that dangling sword position, and instead of completely uncorking it this way, ends up bringing it back and then chambering it straight forward as an offside, which just catches the arm. Oz, believing that the attack is coming to the left side of his body, doesn't have time to get the defense down 100% and takes a shot just on the edge of power in the forearm. So here we can see these shots are actually coming really quick, right? So we just watch the speed of these shots coming in, right? That's moving very fast. It's just a few frames. And oftentimes when someone's fighting with a relatively small defense, you're going to find that fights end quickly one way or the other. So here in slow motion we can see sort of the same exchange almost, right? So Wulfgar goes over for the full defense on his left side, right? He's going to hang the sword there for a hanging block. He's got his shield for defense, and what that does is it chambers his sword up. This time, instead of going straight forward, you know, recall last time he pulled the sword back and then straight forward into an offside to the arm. This time he actually goes back and pulls down into a moulinet. So it still comes offside, but you can see he races down right in between the front corner of the shield and the basket hilt. So here Oz has the defense of his shield, and he's bringing his hand up. He doesn't want to pump the shield out, because if he pumps the shield out, he's going to be badly out of position with that shield if he gets faked. So Wulfgar shoots for the slot and just catches it. You can see Oz almost has the sword block there, but Wulfgar manages to beat the defense in there, just barely. And this being practice, they're doing lots of passes at each other. You can see a lot of discipline coming from Sir Oz in keeping his shield in position. That shot just barely coming over the edge, just on the edge of power. You can see they've both got very fast hands, a very fluid sword motion. Really good exchange there. Chopping for the offside leg, almost got it, not quite. And here you can see when you're fighting with a small shield, you have to do about half of your block with your sword, probably. Close shot there. Really good exchange. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at those two passes there. In the first pass, of course, no certain result. So, again, that boxer stance coming, you can see Oz shifting his weight forward and back. As I'm going back and forward here, you can see as Oz shifts his body and Wulfgar shifts his feet, they're adjusting to each other all the time. So look at all these little adjustments happening. Those are pretty significant. The other thing to watch is as they're moving their swords, they are prepared to fire at any time. You've seen how quickly these guys can throw. However, you don't want to get caught into a position where you're necessarily bouncing around, or your opponent can predict or time when you're doing one of your little movements. Here, once again, we see Wulfgar hanging a block. He's trying to protect his head. To me, this is almost, it looks like the way I defend myself against a left-handed fighter. This is the third time in a row we see him holding his shield down and far across his body to protect the leg, and his sword over here to protect the head. We know that that chambers him up to throw a good shot. In this case, Oz, perhaps not wanting to allow that to happen, throws. That keeps, that is relatively easily blocked. But what it does is if you watch the shield position come up, now Wulfgar can no longer do what he had been doing before, because his shield is blocking himself. So that's one of those examples where having a big shield can get in your way. So there's that offside, but see, he had to pull the shield out of the way to do the offside this time. See, the shield comes down and then the offside. By that time, Oz has had time to get out, rechamber, put his back foot down, and as soon as that back foot lands, see, watch this, watch his foot. When it lands here, a little bit further down, when his foot lands, boom, then he throws. Now in this case it's relatively easily read, picked up by the front corner of that shield, but you can see as he's stepping back, he's counterpunching. So he's throwing boom, boom, boom as Wulfgar is trying to close in. Now in this case, this is one of the few times you see Oz's shield come out relatively far. He's still showing a lot of discipline, but instead of chasing the tip of the sword, he's blocking the basket, which means it's a little bit easier to not get caught, right? So, and then he's able to throw around his own shield, no problem, because his own shield's quite small. And here they actually both set up. It looks to me like Wulfgar reads this the same way I do. From this position, there's not a lot of options for Oz with that sword after it gets punched by the shield, so it looks to me like it's going to be an onside head or an onside leg is his best shot from that position. Wulfgar, brings his sword up to start guarding this side and then fades this leg out of the way instead of dropping his shield. I'm starting to suspect the way his shield is hung, he can't necessarily protect that that left leg very well, so you see him actually stepping out of position and guarding his face. Now back into guard. And here you can see, once again, this to me is that same position, right? From Wulfgar, he's blocking here, and what he really wants to do is either uncork an offside or drop a moulinet. Oz also goes into the same position, a little bit less of it seems to me, how do I put it? Oz is in this position, I think, because he's prepared to defend that left side, and I think what he's looking to do is bring his body out of the way if an attack comes over here. So yeah, he pulls his leg back to stay out of distance. Now here, this is, if you watch the body mechanics on Sir Oz, this is such a close shot. He drops and moves the weight on both of his feet to try to get that leg, and almost manages to get it, but it's just kind of right at the very tip of his sword. So it doesn't quite sink it, but you can see it's a close thing, and when all of that weight drops, it's just a matter of getting past the tip of the sword to hit with the forte of the sword. And I think that would probably have been a nice hard shot. Out comes, here you can see, because he's committed, he's dropped his weight down. Wulfgar uses that opportunity to charge forward. It's a little slower than normal because he had to move his shield in his way. And this is when you see Oz start reaching out with the shield because he knows he needs to block that basket. Very close, you know, they're both blocking just as much as they need to. And you can see you're getting your sword defense on each other as well. And here, another, just a matter of inches here as they're reading each other's defense well. And here you can see Oz is chambered again for an offside. Just doesn't quite get it under the edge. There's that moulinet that we saw earlier, again, just out of reach. These guys are fighting really, really well. It looks like they've almost choreographed it. Every shot is being well blocked. Look at this shot. Just get picked up on the wind-up. The offside gets picked up. And here, I don't think this shot quite lands on the arm because if you look, the arm and the blade are almost parallel. But if you look, if Oz hadn't lifted his arm that high, it probably would have been a good shot. That winds him up to uncork the shot into the offside head. That gets picked up by the shield and the sword. And now you're going for a really wide wrap from each of them. Now, in the case of Oz, he's trying to throw this wrap around the shield. And if you look, he's got his own shield. This is one of those places where having a little shield might be a bit advantageous. If you look, Wulfgar's shield is twisted around his arm, and because it's so wide, there's a lot of leverage working against him, which means there's the opportunity to go around with a wrap. Wulfgar, it looks like he's going to convert what looked like a wide wrap and end up shortening it and throw it into, yeah, I think that does still come in as a wrap. There's that leg shot, maybe, hard to tell. Yeah, so it looks like Oz took the wrap and Wulfgar took the leg. Really good exchange. A lot to break down there. And happening fast, right? Now, we get to do it over the course of minutes. This happens in seconds. Really fast sword work. Just cutting the margins. That one's possible because of body shift, right? So this is, I see Duke Sean of Tarragon throw this shot. So let's just watch it in slow motion instead of having me mess around with the frame rate, shall we? So a lot of lateral movement, left and right, coming from Wulfgar here. Oz is sort of playing the center point in a circle. So he's rotating a little bit, but he's making Wulfgar walk around him. But here it's going to pay off, I think. Wulfgar steps away from where he's going to throw that shot. And you see this often with this offside hip, which is going to be really dangerous against a small shield. Against a really wide shield like Wulfgar's is going to be pretty tough to land. But generally when you see someone throw this, it is sort of a drop moulinet to the outside hip with a step the opposite direction. So even though the target is going to be over here, or maybe over here, instead of stepping that direction, if you step that direction, you just get your opponent to turn and follow you, which means that angle's not going to work because you really need to bend your wrist to get it around the corner of their defense. So generally what you do, instead of stepping this way around to where you want the target to be, you instead step this way away from where you're throwing, but it gets your opponent's defense to follow you just a little bit, just enough to freeze it up so that while your body's going this way, your sword can then come this way, if that makes sense. That's a lot of arrows on the screen at once. But if you see there's a step forward, right to that, now he's basically crossed body, he's got his toe pointed this direction, right? And then as he comes up, There's the shift. It's not much, but instead of, and it's a neat gather step too. Instead of going this direction, he's gone that direction just a little bit. And that lets him get his opponent to not follow the defense, right? So here, there's the shuffle step, and you see that punch out. Oz starts to move the shield. The shield's going this direction a little bit. It's not going the direction it needs to. And that catches just around the corner. You can see Wulfgar's doing the same sort of wind in. They're both doing a lot of sword blocking, which is, you know, one of my favorite things to do. A lot of people will say don't sword block. If you're sword blocking, that's not quite at range, that one. Didn't quite bite. You can't be throwing offense and defense, but I like sword blocking. I think it's pretty cool. Oftentimes, if you time your sword block so it's part of, you're picking up a block for free as you do your attack. That's really nice. If you have to lose your entire offense, then sometimes that trade-off's not worth it. Speaking of trade-offs, not quite worth it. Oz almost gets the block on this one. He knows he's risking it. Wulfgar might actually be planting his weight on that front foot as a bit of a bait. I think he might be saying, yes, I'll take it in the leg in return to trade for the head. Not a good idea if you're counting on, you know, medieval doctors and a lack of antibiotics. But you know, it's a good way to get a kill if you're willing to take a shot in the leg. That's a really cool blow. I can't throw that one. It's a nice feint into an onside shot with a bit of a scoop after a teardrop, and that is a nice pendulum. So there's two pretty cool shots back to back from Sir Oz. This one here. So if we just focus on what's going to happen in this space, it does get picked up because Wulfgar's got that nice hanging block, which will protect you pretty much from everything on that side unless it's super duper sneaky. But here you see the hand comes down and goes immediately into a teardrop. So this looks like it's going to be a blow to the leg. And instead of it going in the leg, he does, well, let's see if I can describe it properly from this angle. He doesn't even throw to make contact with the shield. He immediately converts it into a second shot. So oftentimes you'll see people throw what's called a teardrop because they throw down to a target, say the leg, and then they make a bit of a teardrop shape as they go back towards the target by creating a loop, right? That doesn't look much like a teardrop, but if you imagine a droplet looking like this, terrible illustration, it's your sword tip sort of makes that path in the air, usually after a strike. But if you watch, he doesn't even throw the strike. He feints the strike, immediately goes into the teardrop, snaps forward, and almost catches Wulfgar. Wulfgar might have seen that shot before, but he's stepping out of range and he's got the hanging guard. Still pretty neat. Not a lot of guys can do that with power. And then this one's a really sharp, fast shot. Again, almost into that slot, not quite. Especially tough with that steep angle. The steep angle created by Wulfgar's shield. Now here we see another neat shot. And this is a place where you can see where Wulfgar tends to come in and hang the guard, which suits him really well. You see Oz will pulse the guard down and then back into sort of a boxer position. Here you see, I see a threat, pulse, nope, back into a pulse, back into a boxer's position. So because he's got a lot less defense with that smaller shield, he's got to not commit to hanging his guard there. So here you see, sort of like we saw with the previous shot, you see a body shift actually creating the opening on the opposite side as what you would expect, right? So Oz is now moving this direction, right? Big guy. Now he's stepping around this side, right? But the attack comes on that side, right? And where's the shield? It's over on this side. That shield is over there partly because he got his opponent to travel with him and partly because he's just sort of barreling through, right? So here he comes forward, straight in, circle around the side. His shield makes contact. His opponent's following him. His opponent is also blind because of the big shield. Wulfgar might be feeling a wrap coming to this direction, or it might just be there's a lot of shield-on-shield contact and a lot of momentum from a bigger guy, And instead, if you look at, now that we've talked about why the shield is, why Wulfgar's shield is traveling the wrong direction for the blow that's going to land, take a look at how the shot mechanics work. So the first time we've seen this really, or one of the first times we've seen it, the sword is in front of Oz, goes into a back hanging guard, almost an old school Bellatrix style. The sword is now going to travel all the way around behind him, loop up, and back down. With, look at the amount of body lean going on too, right? So Oz has not been doing a lot of body leaning, but to get that shot, he's continued his hips forward and moved his torso back, right? So if we take a look at that, there's a lot to track. There's a lot to track here. Shield bind contact, step, rotation, bringing that sword around in more than a 360-degree arc right into the armpit, and he's also got his opponent off balance, right? So pretty masterful shot there. I've bitten that one a few times myself. All right, let's get another couple passes in. There's a lot to see here. These guys have a lot of endurance. I don't know how long this practice was. That one, I think that one went right through the guard. Let's just take a look at that shot. I think that was a powerful shot. Or it might have actually driven Wulfgar's sword into his own head. It's a little hard to tell. Here you see a pretty deep windup. This is actually really interesting. To me, this looks for all the world like it's going to be a wrap from Wulfgar. I don't know how he manages to convert so well. Here he's coming up and manages to actually turn it into an offside. But I think it gets picked up on the sword block. So for me, that looks like the shot is going to come around towards the camera. But as he's winding up, he stops and then turns it the other direction. Pretty smoothly, too. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that his heel's coming up. That kind of rotation, right now the tip of the sword, you can't really see it, is towards us. That tip is going to very quickly rotate away from the camera to get that in. I'm not quite sure I could do that myself. That might be some, it looks like there's a lot of shoulder and forearm to get that done. Pretty cool. Here you can see the swords just sort of blasting off each other. This one, it looks like Wulfgar maybe got the block and his own sword gets blasted into his head. It's hard to tell. Sometimes when using YouTube video footage, I lose frames, so it's a little hard to tell what he called there. There's that sharp moulinet again from Wulfgar, so not from the same position. We can see that they're both getting a lot more fluid and dynamic. Early on, they were fighting a lot more tight. This is probably a bit due to fatigue. Now we're seeing they're still very alert. They're still moving very dynamically, but they're flowing a lot more. There's that hanging guard, and there's that moulinet into the slot again. Yeah, they just said it. Knackered. No kidding, I would be. Both going for deep wraps there, it looked like. So this is one that I also find a little bit difficult to do myself at range. Partly because I've got a bit of a bum shoulder, but if you look, yeah, they both throw the wrap. I think the reason why Wulfgar's manages to land and Oz's doesn't is really, I think it's a little bit less about the fact that Wulfgar's got a bigger shield and a little bit more about the fact that Wulfgar actually, if you watch his body movement, goes around, whereas Oz is kind of coming straight in. He does take a little bit of a hop there. But if you look at the ending position, Wulfgar's facing pretty much that direction, and it looks like he's sort of out-circled a little bit. A lot of good cutting around each other's defense. That is a really sharp looking shot. We're seeing some really interesting looking mechanics here. So here, what Wulfgar does is pump an onside threat with the foredge, keeps his defense, and then throws into oh, actually, that one might have ended up. Actually, I do think it ends up as an on-edge wrap. So this shot, instead of coming in on with the front edge, lands with a false edge. And at the very end, just whips around. So it looks like it's actually getting over the defense, right? So, and I think the reason why it might be getting over the defense, oh no, it's still under. So maybe it could have been a regular onside shot. But it's interesting to see regardless that it's not thrown as an onside snap, it's thrown as a wrap. Let's watch one more pass. Really tight cut, almost gets around the shield. In the SCA, you have to strike above the knee, otherwise it doesn't count. That one, almost there. Oh yes, and he recognizes it in the video. So that's a similar shot to the one we saw. It didn't quite land quite right. You can see he is grabbing the shield a little bit. In this case, it landed not super hard, probably because the hand was binding up here on the inside of the shield. It does land flat. They don't notice it at the time, but it also didn't land that hard. So let's skip ahead. Racing for the legs. The other thing that I'm spotting is it appears to me like Oz is sort of controlling the pacing of the fight a little bit because he's not responding to his opponent quite so much. I think he's responding appropriately. It's not that he's not responding enough, but I think it's because he knows he has to be disciplined with that shield. So you'll see when they come into range, you know, usually Oz is counterpunching. Now that might look, I think, to many folks like that means Wulfgar's controlling the fight because Wulfgar's choosing when to engage. I think Oz is, in a sense, pacing the fight a little bit more because when he throws a move, he can sort of get Wulfgar's feet to respond, get his hands to respond, whereas Oz is moving, you know, a little bit more slowly. I don't think he can afford to overcommit, to like jump into a position where he's going to get faked. So anyway, that's just an observation. I don't know if it's accurate. It's probably more appropriate to ask these guys what they think. Actually, and at this point, I'd like to ask you guys what you think as well. Here we see a similar shot to what we saw before with that pendulum into the body there as well. So that's a really nice return. The only reason that return really works, I think, is because it's going off of that tall hang guard, allows the sword's momentum to go up and over into a pendulum. Really masterfully done. And you notice the other key thing, for that to work, you've got to get the hand inside the edge of the shield. So because the hand gets inside the edge of the shield and he's got really good sword movement, he's able to pivot around that point and still get enough power up in there. So cool. Thank you guys very much for watching. I know it's been a little while since I uploaded a video. If you've got other feedback or comments, I think it would be great if you were to leave your observations in the comments below. Thanks very much for sharing the video as well.